Tim Clark doesn't waste words. When the boss of Emirates speaks, the aviation world listens. And this time, his sights are set on Airbus. For years, Emirates kept the Airbus A350-1000 at arm's length, dismissing it as unfit for their network. But suddenly, there's movement. Clark has called the jet of interest. Coming from him, that's not casual curiosity. It's a signal, a very deliberate one. So what changed? Is Airbus finally closing the gap? Or is this just another warning shot fired at both Airbus and Rolls-Royce, and maybe even Boeing? Let's start with the real reason Emirates walked away from the A350 in the first place: the engine. On paper, the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB-97 looked like a powerhouse. High thrust, modern design, efficient fuel burn. But for Emirates, paper doesn't matter. Real-world performance does. And when the A350-1000 was tested against Dubai's brutal operating environment, searing heat, back-to-back ultra-long hauls, constant exposure to desert sand, the engine broke down far too quickly. Tim Clark wasn't shy about it. He flat out said the engine couldn't even last 600 flight cycles in Emirates' conditions. 600. That's barely a fraction of what they needed. Their benchmark wasn't theoretical. It was hard, tested, real, 2,500 cycles. If an engine couldn't survive that, it wasn't going into Emirates' fleet. This wasn't nitpicking. For Emirates, engines are the beating heart of their business model. Fail there, and everything else collapses. Rolls-Royce tried to soften the blow. Their idea? Just buy more engines. Keep spares in rotation. Swap them out when they wear down, and keep the fleet moving. But the math was brutal. Each spare cost upwards of $20 million. Multiply that by an entire fleet, and suddenly, the A350-1000 wasn't a sleek new flagship. It was a financial black hole. Clark didn't bite. Why should Emirates pay tens of millions more just to make an engine barely survive? That turned the jet from a business tool into a maintenance nightmare. And Emirates doesn't gamble like that. By 2014, Clark had seen enough. Emirates tore up its entire A350 order. 70 jets gone in one stroke, including 21 A350-1000s. For Airbus, it was a humiliating blow. Emirates wasn't just another customer. They were one of the most influential long-haul carriers on Earth. When they cancelled, the whole industry takes notice. Clark's reasoning was blunt. The aircraft simply didn't fit Emirates' operational needs. It was too heavy, too maintenance-hungry, too unreliable in the heat. Airbus could put on a brave face in public, but behind the scenes, that cancellation hurt. And it sent a message that was impossible to ignore. If you want Emirates back, you'll have to earn it. Fast forward to March 2025. After more than a decade of distance, Tim Clark's tone suddenly shifts. He says the A350-1000 is now of interest. That's not something he says lightly. Clark doesn't hedge, doesn't play nice for the sake of PR. So when he used those words, analysts around the world perked up. Emirates had quietly been re-evaluating the jet, running the numbers again, testing layouts, looking at where it might actually fit into their network. And then Clark dropped the real bombshell. We'd probably order 30 to 50 if the engines were ready. Now, not maybe, not we'll see. He said it plainly. The interest is real. The only holdup? Rolls-Royce. So what's happening at Rolls-Royce? They've been working to patch the very problem that broke the deal years ago. Durability. Engineers talk about new materials, better coatings, improved cooling systems. They've poured real money into testing, and on paper, the trends look positive. But there's a catch. Testing isn't the same as Dubai in August. Rolls-Royce can prove an engine runs fine in a lab. But can it really survive 2,500 full power cycles in hot, dusty, sand-choked conditions? That's the only data Emirates cares about. Until Rolls-Royce proves it in the real world, Clark won't sign. Of course, Airbus isn't the only one under the microscope. Boeing is, too. Emirates is still waiting for its 777X fleet, an order that was supposed to reshape their future. Boeing promised over 100 deliveries by now. Instead, 0. The jet is still stuck in certification limbo, with every new timeline feeling more like guesswork. For Emirates, that's more than an inconvenience. They built part of their schedule around those deliveries to survive. Emirates launched a $5 billion retrofit program across 191 aircraft, not to expand, just to hold the line. New cabins, refreshed interiors, updated tech. It bought them time, but it didn't solve the deeper problem. No new jets. Boeing's delay has opened the door for Airbus, and the A350-1000 is starting to look less like a rejected project and more like a lifeline. Here's why Clark is giving it another look. The A350-1000 fills a very specific gap. It's bigger than the standard A350-900, offering more capacity and range. But it's not as massive or expensive as the delayed 777X. That makes it perfect for routes that demand long reach and premium cabin depth, but don't need the full heft of a 400-seat monster. Think Santiago, Brisbane, or thinner, but high-yield. Long hauls. It's also more efficient. Lower fuel burn per seat than the A380, easier turnarounds, standard airport compatibility. No need for special infrastructure or oversized ground crews. In short, it's flexible. And flexibility is exactly what Emirates needs right now. All of this is building toward one moment, the 2025 Dubai Air Show. That's the stage where Emirates makes its boldest announcements. If the A350-1000 is truly back in play, that's where we'll see it. 30 to 50 jets, a headline order, and Airbus back in the Gulf market. But Clark has been clear. If Rolls-Royce can't prove durability, there's no deal. He doesn't want promises, slides, or trend lines. He wants cycle data. He wants proof. Until then, the A350-1000 is stuck in limbo. But this isn't just about one plane. Clark's criticism points to something larger, a decline in trust across the entire industry. He's called out both Airbus and Boeing for cutting corners, missing deadlines, and sacrificing quality. He's blasted Rolls-Royce for shifting cycle targets every year. And beyond manufacturing, there's the global economy. Trade wars, tariffs, supply chain delays, all of it makes long-term fleet planning a gamble. A single sanction or tariff can throw off an entire production line. Clark has described it as a reset, something as disruptive as the 2008 financial crisis. In this new environment, airlines don't just ask, "What jet should we buy?" They ask, "Who can we even trust to deliver?" That's what makes the A350-1000 decision historic. It's no longer just about Airbus versus Boeing. It's about whether any manufacturer can still deliver what they promise. So where does this leave us? After years of calling the A350-1000 unfit, Tim Clark now admits he's interested. He even hints at 3250 orders. That shift alone is seismic. But there's still one immovable obstacle: the engine. Unless Rolls-Royce can prove the Trent XWB-97 can handle 2,500 cycles in Guelph conditions without breaking down, Emirates won't commit. If they succeed, Airbus could score one of the most important orders of the decade, a comeback that reshapes the long-haul market. If they fail, Boeing wins by default, even with its delays. Either way, this decision won't stay in Dubai. Emirates' choice will echo from Toulouse to Seattle, influencing airlines across Asia, Africa, and beyond. So the question remains, will the A350-1000 finally land in Emirates' fleet? Or will it be remembered as the jet that almost made it? That answer might arrive this November at the Dubai Air Show. And whatever Emirates decides, the whole aviation industry will be watching. What do you think? Is Tim Clark warming up for a massive Airbus comeback, or just using leverage against Boeing and Rolls-Royce? Drop your thoughts below, and if you want more no-spin breakdowns from inside the aviation industry, hit like and subscribe. Tim Clark, the boss of Emirates Airlines, doesn't mince words, and this time, Airbus is listening. After years of keeping the A350-1000 at arm's length, Emirates is now officially interested. That might not sound dramatic, but coming from Clark, it's a signal, a very deliberate one. The holdup, Rolls-Royce, specifically their Trent XWB-97 engine. Emirates wants power, durability, and non-stop reliability on some of the world's harshest routes, and so far, that engine hasn't cleared the bar. But now there's movement, and with it, the kind of pressure that could tip billions in fleet orders. Is Airbus finally closing the gap, or is this just another warning shot aimed at both engine makers and their rivals in Seattle? We're going to answer all of that and more. For now, let's start at the beginning. When Emirates evaluated the A351-000, it wasn't the airframe that caused hesitation. It was the engine, specifically Rolls-Royce's Trent XWB-97. On paper, it met the specs, but in reality, it couldn't handle Emirates' operating environment. High heat, long haul, quick turnaround, Gulf routes are brutal, and the engine just wasn't lasting. Tim Clark didn't hold back. He said the XWB-97 couldn't even hit 600 flight cycles in Emirates' conditions. That's nowhere near what they needed. Their benchmark, 2,500 cycles, not in theory, on the ground in their network under real stress. To close the gap, Rolls-Royce floated a whoop. Buy more engines. Rotate them. Except that a chunk of your fleet will always be down for maintenance. For Emirates, that meant spending tens of millions more on spares, maybe $20 million per engine, just to stay operational. From Clark's perspective, this wasn't a small compromise. It turned the A351-000 into a high-maintenance headache. The engine might work elsewhere, but for Emirates, it broke the math. And unlike some carriers, Emirates doesn't just absorb that cost and hope for the best. They fly hard, they fly often, and they expect gear that holds up. So, when the Trent XWB-97 couldn't meet that bar, Emirates didn't wait around for promises. They backed out. The engine wasn't the only issue. Tim Clark had long-standing concerns about the A350's design, especially after Airbus adjusted it back in 2011. That redesign was meant to sharpen the aircraft's edge against Boeing's wide-body lineup, but in doing so, Airbus shifted the A351-00 into a heavier, more range-focused platform. Clark wasn't convinced it served Emirates' needs. He argued the new spec came with more weight, more heat stress on the engine, and fewer options when it came to flying medium-haul missions efficiently. That's a problem for an airline like Emirates, where versatility is key. Their model depends on aircraft that can swing between high-frequency regional routes and long-haul services without forcing extra maintenance or spares into the equation. In 2014, Clark made the decision to walk. Emirates canceled its full A350 order, 70 jets total, including 21 of the 1000 series. Airbus tried to stay composed in public, but this was a major contract loss from one of the world's most influential long-haul carriers. And Clark wasn't vague. He said the aircraft didn't match what Emirates needed operationally. The cancellations sent a clear message. If Airbus wanted back in, they'd have to re-earn it. Flying out of Dubai isn't like flying out of Frankfurt or Seattle. The heat alone pushes engines harder, and constant exposure to fine desert sand doesn't exactly help. Emirates doesn't operate in gentle conditions. They run long-haul flights back-to-back, day after day, with minimal margin for downtime. That's where the XWB-97 struggled. Rolls-Royce built the engine to perform efficiently under what they called benign environments. But when Emirates pushed it to meet their schedule across hot, dusty routes, the engine wear was faster, maintenance intervals shorter, and reliability suffered. Tim Clark didn't hold back. He said the engine simply couldn't meet the performance standards in Gulf conditions. And when you're running one of the world's largest wide-body fleets, that kind of mismatch isn't just inconvenient, it's a deal-breaker. In March 2025, Tim Clark gave the clearest sign yet that Emirates' stance on the A351-00 was shifting. After years of skepticism, he called the jet of interest to us. That one line hit different, especially from a guy who usually doesn't hedge his words. He explained that Emirates had been quietly working in the background, reviewing layouts, evaluating potential missions, running the numbers again. This wasn't just polite curiosity. The airline was redoing the homework it had thrown out years earlier. Then came the kicker. We'd probably order 30 to 50 if the engines were ready now. That wasn't hypothetical, it was a message. Emirates is interested, it just doesn't trust the engine yet. Clark still wants a power plant that can survive heavy Gulf ops, but his tone was less combative this time. More like a warning shot across the bow. Directed not just at Rolls-Royce, but Airbus too. He's open to a deal, but only if they can deliver. As of August 20th, 24, Rolls-Royce had logged 108 orders for the Trent XUV97. It's the engine powering every A350-100 out there, and on paper, the numbers look solid. But Emirates has never been interested in paper. They want proof. And so far, Rolls-Royce hasn't fully delivered it. The engine maker claims improvements are underway. Updates to materials, coatings, cooling systems. They put real money into testing and say durability is trending in the right direction. But there's a gap between trend lines and real-world performance, especially when your testbed isn't Dubai in August. Rolls-Royce insists that with the new changes, the Trent XWB-97 is more than capable of supporting long-haul missions. But they've yet to demonstrate consistent reliability across 2,500 cycles in the extreme conditions Emirates demands. Daily long hauls, rapid turnarounds, and non-stop exposure to sand and heat. Behind the scenes, there's growing tension. Rolls-Royce believes Emirates is asking for an engine that goes beyond what anyone else needs. Emirates counters that this isn't a luxury, it's survival. Every unplanned engine swap eats time, money, and passenger goodwill. For an airline running dozens of ultra-long-haul flights per day, downtime isn't just an inconvenience, it's a system breakdown. So, while the engine may be improving, it hasn't yet crossed the line from in development to approved for Emirates, and until it does, the A350-1000 remains stuck in limbo. Emirates hasn't closed the door on the A350-1000. In fact, Tim Clark has left it slightly ajar with a very specific key. If Rolls-Royce can prove the Trent XWB-97 can hold up under Emirates' demanding schedule and harsh conditions, there's still a path forward. The Dubai Airshow in late 2025 is the obvious stage. Emirates loves a big announcement, and a return to the A350 program would send a clear message. The aircraft has matured, the engine is ready, and Airbus has done enough to win back trust, but it's not guaranteed. We've parked that order for now, Clark said in March. We need to see the durability first. That means test data, not slide decks. Flight cycles, not estimates. For Emirates, everything hinges on performance in the real world. They've seen what happens when a product doesn't meet spec, and they're not about to build a fleet around another. Maybe Rolls-Royce can say the right things, but unless they back it up with engines that can survive 2,500 full power cycles without choking on sand or overheating, there's no deal. The A350-1000 isn't just another wide-body option. It sits in a very specific gap Emirates needs to fill. Right now, the airline has the A350-900 South incoming and the Boeing 77X eventually waiting in the wings. But what happens in the middle of that handoff? That's where the -1000 fits. The -1000 offers more range and capacity than the standard A350, but without the full heft of the Trip 7X4A. That opens up real flexibility. Think long-range, high-yield routes that don't justify a 400-seat aircraft. Places like Santiago or Brisbane where you need reach and premium cabin depth. But not necessarily 7 tons of cargo every time. It's also a hedge. If Boeing slips further on the Trip 7X, and they've got a track record, Emirates needs a plan B. The A350-1000 could be that fallback slotted into the 2030s fleet mix as retirements ramp up and new routes emerge. It's not about replacing one aircraft or reshaping the strategy. It's about creating depth, having more tools for different jobs. And if Rolls-Royce can finally get their act together, the A350-1000 becomes a serious option again. Emirates didn't plan to be stuck in limbo, but here they are with a Trip 7X order that's delivered exactly 0 aircraft. That wasn't the deal. Boeing had promised over 100 of them by now, and Emirates built part of its future schedule around those deliveries. Instead, the aircraft is still in certification limbo. Testing continues, And every revised timeline feels more like a guess than a plan. To keep flying, Emirates launched a retrofit program to 191 jets completely overhauled. New cabins, updated tech, full fleet refresh. That project alone is costing them around $5 billion. Not to expand, just to hold the line. It's not hard to see why frustration is setting in. And it's not just about the delays, it's the lack of clarity. Boeing keeps asking for patience, but Emirates isn't known for waiting quietly. That's where the A351 starts to make sense. It may not carry as much as the 777X, but it's in production, flying, and available. At this point, predictability might be worth more than performance. Emirates didn't just retrofit planes to extend their lifespan. They used it to test what passengers actually wanted. And so far, premium economy is hitting. The seats are getting booked.